Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Katie Bray, and I am Involvement and Engagement Manager here at Alzheimer's Research UK. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, in which we will discuss risk factors for dementia. I'll be joined by Professor Jason Warren and Dr. Fiona McLean, who will share their research aiming to understand how and why certain factors are linked with dementia risk. Before we get into the discussion, I'll just go over some housekeeping. During the event today, you are welcome to switch on the subtitles using the CC button at the bottom of your screen. These subtitles are generated automatically and so not 100% accurate during the live event, but they will be edited so they are correct on the event recording. After the event, we will send you a link to the event recording, which you'll be able to watch on our website and on our YouTube channel. This is also where you'll be able to find all the previous event recordings like this. If you would like to ask a question today during today's discussion, you will need to click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which will bring up the box where you can type your question. We know today's topic is of great interest and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. I should say that we aren't able to answer any personal medical questions during today's event. So now we're going to ask you some poll questions so that we can find out just a little bit more about you. And these should pop up on your screen about now. And they ask about your reasons for attending today, how you rate your current knowledge of dementia research, and if you've attended one of our online events about research before. So I'll just pause and give you a chance to start answering those. And this is really helpful because one of the challenges of this format means that we don't actually get to see you. So it just helps us understand who we've got coming along. So I can see we're getting some answers coming in now, which is great. Wonderful. So I think we've had a lot of people answer so far. So it seems like people have about an average knowledge of dementia research coming into the event. And we also seem to have a mix of people's reasons for attending today's event. So a lot of people are coming because they know somebody with dementia. And then others are caring for someone with dementia. Their work is related to dementia. And we have people with dementia and also those who don't have a personal connection but want to find out more. So it's really great to have you with us today. And we also have a 50-50 split, I would say, on whether this is people's first event today. So I hope you do enjoy today and you take a lot away from it. So thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, I'm just going to tell you who we are at Alzheimer's Research UK in case you're not so familiar with us. So we are the UK's leading dementia research charity, and we're working to revolutionise the way that we treat, diagnose and prevent dementia by investing in the best research, powering the most forward-thinking scientists and joining force with world-class organisations. But all of this is only possible thanks to our amazing supporters who donate, fundraise, volunteer and raise awareness of our work, plus so much more. And it's with your support that we will keep going until every person is free from the heartbreak of dementia. And I just want to take a moment today to mention one really key way that people support our work and an offer that we have for you. So people leaving a gift in their will actually supports about 1 in 3 of the research projects that we fund here at Alzheimer's Research UK. And we know from people doing this that they feel it's a way to make a difference for future generations. And so we have an offer we'd like to share with you of a free way to write your will. So with the will writing experts, FairWill, you can write your will for free online. And it's really simple and straightforward. You fill in a questionnaire, they go away, do the actual writing of the will and send it back to you within 5 working days. And there's no obligation to leave a gift to Alzheimer's Research UK if you use this offer. However, a gift of any size makes a real difference to our research. So we've put a link in the chat and I'll remind you of these details again later. But back to today's event, we put on events like this so that you can hear directly from Alzheimer's Research UK funded researchers as they share and discuss their research and how it could change lives. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today. And first up, we have Dr. Fiona McLean. Fiona will come on screen now. Lovely.
Hello. My name is Dr. Fiona McLean and I'm an Alzheimer's Research UK Fellow at the University of Dundee. I work full-time in the lab researching dementia, and the focus of my research is understanding how obesity and type 2 diabetes may lead to the development of dementia-related diseases such as Alzheimer's. I also have an interest in the blood vessels in the brain and how keeping them working properly might be really important for keeping your brain healthy. And I'd now like to pass over to Jason.
Thanks, Fiona, and hello, everyone. I'm Jason Warren, and I'm a clinical cognitive neurologist at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery on Queen Square, where I help run a clinic, a national referral clinic, particularly trying to help people with young onset forms of Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, and other dementias, and unusual dementias. And in addition to my clinical work, I run a research group at the Dementia Research Centre in UCL, where our particular interest has been the linkage between hearing and dementia, and particularly looking at how we can use hearing as an early warning sign, an early detection marker for dementia, and the ways in which the hearing brain can be measured to help us understand important aspects of daily life communication in people living with dementia, with the different dementia diseases. And of course, this has recently become very mainstream within the wider world of dementia research. So I think at that point, I'd like to hand over to begin our Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. And we'll have Fiona join us back on screen. And I think what I'd like to do is kick off with a bit of a general question. So dementia risk, there's a number of things that contribute to it. So it's things like our age, our genes, and the environment and the lifestyle which we find ourselves within. So I wonder, Jason, if I could come to you and you could tell us just a little bit about how these different things contribute to the risk of dementia.
Yeah, so this is a really complicated area, and it's received a lot of attention recently. So we know that whether an individual person is going to get dementia is really, it's like a complex interplay between a lot of different factors, some of which we are increasingly getting to know about and others which we don't know about. And ultimately what we'd like to be able to do, of course, is to profile individual people, because, you know, if someone comes along to clinic, that's really what they're concerned about, is what is my risk, you know, and how likely is it that I will get dementia in future? And at the moment, to be honest, we're still not very good at that, despite all the progress that's being made. So a lot of the discussion about risk factors and things you'll hear today are very general. Genetic risk, which in a sense is the risk that someone is born with a feature in their genetic makeup, in their genetic code, which is going to make them at risk of dementia, usually later in life, is an important factor. But I think it's very important to understand how this might work. So it's very, very unusual, certainly in the commonest of the dementias, in Alzheimer's disease, to have a strongly familial inherited pattern of dementia running through a family. That's an extremely small proportion of cases where it's passed down with a gene. And unfortunately, of course, people living in those families know they have a family illness, and this is a very major issue for them, of course, people of all ages, not just people who are affected. But most people don't have that kind of genetic risk. So the vast majority of genetic risk for Alzheimer's is a complex set of different genes, some of which we don't even know about yet, which sort of introduce a predisposition or greater or lesser tendency of someone to develop dementia. It's by no means a certainty. And that means it can be influenced by lots of other things, like, for example, environmental and lifestyle and other things. One of the things that quite often comes along in clinic is people will say, well, I'm really worried because, you know, my grandmother had dementia, my mother had dementia. And this is a very, very common scenario, but it doesn't mean that that's being passed down the generations in a simple inherited way, because dementia, particularly Alzheimer's, is so common that it's quite likely, in fact, that you'll get a co-occurrence of people with dementia in the same family. And then that's a very, very difficult thing to try and untangle. Is that something that's actually in the genes of that family, or is that lifestyle or other factors as well. So you certainly can't assume just because you have particularly an elderly relative or someone who is in the family with dementia that you are going to get dementia in that way. And one of the other big genetic themes is the so-called ApoE gene. And this is one of the important, if you like, commoner sort of genetic markers. But one of the things to understand about it is it's only a tendency. So if you have particular types of ApoE, you might be more likely to get Alzheimer's disease, and it's the Alzheimer's disease risk that's mainly modified by it at a slightly earlier age. But we don't in our clinic test for that routinely because we can't tell an individual person who might have a particular ApoE4 gene what is your personal risk accurately and when might you get Alzheimer's disease if you're going to, or if you will get Alzheimer's disease. So we don't find it very useful for clinical counselling. Different clinics might take a different view of that, but it is very important in terms of understanding the sort of the wider landscape of risks and how they might work. And then what the Lancet Commission, which has been the very big news in dementia prevention most recently, has focused on has been an important set of factors that are potentially modifiable. So these are, unlike your genes or your age, you can't do much about. These are factors where potentially one could do something about them. So I think feels like I've been talking for too long, so I might stop at that point and see if you want to take that in a different direction, Katie.
Thank you, Jason. That was a really good introduction. I think it's really important to kind of reassure people, as you say, that having members of your family who've experienced dementia doesn't mean that that's your destiny, that actually it's not kind of set in stone in your genes in that way. So Fiona, I thought I'd come to you. So Jason's mentioned the Lancet Commission, which has highlighted risk factors for dementia. But do we know all of the risk factors for dementia? Is there more still to find? Like, you know, what's the current state of research on this?
Yes, I think what I've seen over the last sort of decade has actually been a really positive effort from the research community to understand risk factors. And this is now sort of come out now in this report from this year. And it's really helpful. It's really helpful for the public to better understand what the risks are and what they could perhaps control within their lives. It's also really important for researchers to try and understand that broad landscape of what might be causing dementia. Do we know everything? I think even the risk factors that are listed, we don't understand fully in depth about why they can cause dementia. And I think certainly moving forward, we have an evolving world and we will continue to see perhaps some more risk factors emerge. I think certainly current research, a hot topic at the moment is environmental pollutants, and that includes sort of fumes from cars, as well as things like microplastics, which some people might have heard of in the news about, potentially being ingested from our plastic waste. So do we know everything? No. And do we know everything about the current risk factors? Not fully either. But what is really positive is that we are now becoming aware of them. We're now focusing research into them. And the reason that I have focused some of my own research on these areas is these things are modifiable. These are things that we can change. And that's a very positive thing for the dementia community to think about.
Thank you. That's really, really useful to know. Another kind of more general question, and Jason, I might come to this one on this one to you, which is, do making some of these changes and some of these modifiable risk factors, does it affect dementia risk more for particular types of dementia or at particular ages than others? I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so again, quite a complex set of evidence, and there's quite a nice diagram if people look at the Lancet Commission, sort of a figure showing a kind of a curvy snail shape, showing how the different times at which these different factors in a person's lifetime might come in to play, and I'd certainly suggest people have a look at that. But yeah, I mean that it's not uniform. So for example, what comes out very strikingly in those risk factors is there's a whole set of them which are really to do with blood vessel health, and things like blood pressure and cholesterol and obesity, etc. And diabetes are all kind of linked to really what is the health of your blood vessels. And we know that blood vessel health so-called cerebrovascular health, is linked to one quite common but still quite poorly understood form of dementia called vascular dementia, which can coexist with Alzheimer's disease in a very complicated way. So it's not really fully disentangled yet how much what we're looking at there is really modifying your vascular health, your risk of vascular dementia, if you like, or the vascular component of Alzheimer's versus Alzheimer's specifically versus other kinds of more general factors that might influence dementia. So they're definitely they're stratified in that sense, and they're also stratified in the sense that the different times during a lifetime when they come into play. So, for example, it might be that it's been suggested that a hearing changes might be something that becomes important from midlife, and some other types of lifestyle choices and education and so on might be more important then. But then things like your social interactiveness and how much stimulation you get from friends and those kinds of family, those kinds of things might be more important in people that are older in life. So I think there are some sort of basic precepts we can think about that would be good rules for living if you want to preserve your brain health, but they are tuned to individuals, and they are also tuned to the stage of life you find yourself at.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's that message of what's good for your heart is good for your head, because there's such a network of blood vessels within our brains to supply it with all the energy it needs, that looking after your heart health is just really, really important for looking after your brain health as well. So Fiona, I thought I might come to you next. We get lots of questions about diet and things that people eat and how that can affect their risk. And I wondered, with your kind of background studying metabolism, how our bodies make use of the energy in our food, whether you had any kind of key messages on that, on kind of diet and brain health.
Absolutely. I love what you said there, which is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. It's what I tell people all the time. Absolutely. Diet is a really important factor in your life. Like we say, not just for your brain, but for your whole body. And it can be quite a complicated field to untangle. And I definitely think there's certain words have been demonized in the diet field, such as fat and sugar. And what's really important is to actually understand what that really means and what that means for your brain. So we need fats and we need sugar. We need to give our bodies energy so that we can exist and live. What I look at is when we go too much one way, and that tends to be when we have too much sugar and too much fat. And that starts to lead towards things like obesity, and in my research in particular, type 2 diabetes. And just to clarify for anyone listening, type 1 diabetes is when your body can't produce insulin anymore. And this is typically diagnosed earlier in life. Type 2 diabetes is when your body can produce insulin, but it stops recognizing it. So it becomes desensitized to it. It's kind of like if you were sitting getting tapped. When that tapping first starts on your hand, you notice it. But if you were tapped for ages, you'd become desensitized to it and you might stop noticing it so much. And that's kind of what happens with insulin in your body during type 2 diabetes. And so type 2 diabetes, it tends to be lifestyle driven. And what we've learned is that in the brains of people with type 2 diabetes, we're starting to see some of the things that we recognize in the rest of the body. And we're starting to understand that maybe this might be having a poor impact on the brain. For example, the sugars that we need in our body to work properly aren't being used maybe as efficiently as they should be in the brain. And also, we were just talking about the blood vessels in the brain. Well, those vessels in type 2 diabetes can stop working so well. I study something called the blood-brain barrier. And this is a barrier which sits in our blood vessels, in our brains, and separates the blood that goes around all of our bodies to those nerve cells that exist in our brain and do all that thinking and hard work for us. And when you're healthy, that barrier does a great job of letting the good things in but also taking rubbish out the brain and getting rid of it. And I like to think of it as like a bouncer on the door of a nightclub, and it lets all the good things in and kicks the riffraff out. But what we're recognizing now is that in things like type 2 diabetes, that barrier is starting to not work so well. And that's not good, because that means that that carefully protected environment in your brain is not being looked after so well. And we also see this barrier is not working so well in dementia-related diseases as well. So there's a lot of work there to try and understand how those lifestyle factors like diet and what you choose to put in your body can potentially lead to things like obesity and type 2 diabetes that might then be causing those problems in the brain that can lead to dementia.
Sticking with, you've just been talking about type 2 diabetes, and we've had some questions about that. So there are various things that people can do if they have type 2 diabetes to minimize the effects, and in some cases reverse the early stages of type 2 diabetes. Do we know whether doing those things can then impact on dementia risk? So if you are controlling your diabetes or kind of reversing type 2 diabetes, do we know about that and dementia risk, or is that still an unanswered question?
I think there is a building body of evidence that shows that if you can control your type 2 diabetes, if you can control the sugar levels in your blood to not be high, that is good for your brain. That can help protect your brain. And people will see that with reversing or trying to reduce the impact of their diabetes, that their blood pressure will improve and their heart health will improve. And that in turn is always good for your brain and is always good for those blood vessels that we were talking about, to keep that brain protected up there. So definitely what I'd say is controlling your diabetes is very good. It should be done for yourself anyway.
Yeah.
And definitely being aware as well, because sometimes the people that I worry about are actually people who are pre-diabetic, who don't know about their diabetes. So I think it's always really important throughout your life to be conscious about, your sugar levels. If you've got any symptoms of diabetes, to definitely go and speak to a GP, to a doctor, to check that, if you've got it or not. And also with things like cholesterol as well, because cholesterol you need tested for to know your cholesterol levels. So being aware of these things and giving yourself an MOT for your body and just checking that all those levels of things that you need to control in your life, which are influenced by diet, are at the right levels.
Wow, brilliant. Thank you. Slight change of tack. Jason, I'm going to come to you to talk about hearing, which is your big area of research. So hearing loss is one of those factors that has been linked with dementia through the Lancet Commission. And I guess one of the big questions is it that hearing loss increases your risk of dementia, or is it that hearing loss could be an early sign of dementia, or is it both? I'd love you to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to add, just before getting onto the hearing side, I think very important to think that over the next few decades, the main dementia doctors are not going to be neurologists or psychiatrists, they're going to be GPs. So this is a really big sea change in the whole way we think about dementia, and we really need to take GPs, family practices with us. But that is very important. That's some of those points that Fiona was making, and the same sorts of points you can make about hearing. So hearing and dementia is a again, I'm becoming very repetitive, a complicated link. So there are at least 3 ways in which hearing and dementia could be linked in principle. You just thinking about how it could work. And in fact, what we're still trying to do is disentangle the evidence to sort of work out what it all is telling us. So it does seem as if it's quite a major modifiable risk factor for dementia. So in other words, if your hearing is going down, you quite compellingly, it's been shown, are more likely to develop dementia if you're followed for a long enough period of time. So how could that work? Well, it could be that if you remove the signal coming in from your ears, that literally changes the brain in some way that promotes dementia, the spread of the pathological proteins that cause dementia through the brain. And that would be the most direct way it could work. But that's really not well understood at all, and certainly not in humans. And there's very little direct evidence at the moment that that's how it works. In other words, that you literally, if you remove sound signal, somehow cause the brain to develop dementia. Much better worked out is the situation where if you're not hearing properly, that means you don't communicate properly, you don't do memory tests as well, you may miss things, crucial pieces of information. You are, by focusing all your attention and energy, your mental energy on trying to understand what people are saying to you, are sucking up really important resources that you could be using for other things like remembering and planning and other things that the brain has to do. And so in other words, it's like a massive drain on the brain's resources. And if you think about somebody that's already in the early stages of dementia, if you then do that to the brain, give it that big stress test, it's quite likely that if there is dementia brewing, it will come out sooner. So the best evidence we have at the moment overall is probably that is sort of how it works. And what that's really telling us isn't so much that you kind of, if you have hearing loss, you'll cause dementia, or if you prevent hearing loss, you'll entirely prevent dementia. What it's saying is that you may really importantly change when dementia becomes apparent, if it's in the brain. And the final area, which we've looked at in my research group, is this idea that in fact it might be an early warning sign of a brain problem. In other words, the link goes back the other way, that you're beginning to get the early stages of dementia and hearing begins to change. And because hearing is such a complicated function, and so if you think about what we do when we listen, in the real world, we're always listening, almost always listening through noise. We're trying to pick up very complicated signals like speech. You're trying to understand, follow what I'm saying to you now. You're doing that over whatever sort of connection you're looking at with distractions. You're trying to do a very complicated task. And the same thing could be said of things like listening to music and other interesting sounds. Now, the brain has to work very hard to do that. So if it's not working properly, that is almost like a canary. It could be an early warning sign that there's a problem. And so we are seeing in our research evidence that this also happens. In other words, people's hearing starts to change because the problem is there in their brains. And that gives us an opportunity not so much to prevent dementia, because it's already started, but to detect it early, so that we can then use other tools, such as some of the new drugs that are becoming available, to get in early and treat dementia, and thereby affect the improvement, if you like. So the hearing is almost like it's the early warning system. But there's no reason why you can't have all three of those mechanisms, if you like, operating together and all interacting together. And I think this is one reason why it's such a complicated situation. But out of that, there do come some clear messages. Most basic and important one being, look after your hearing. And if you do have a problem with your hearing, this is where the GP comes in. Get it checked out soon. So go to the GP, who will either assess you or refer you, and that may be initially to an audiology clinic, to have the hearing measured. And if you need to wear hearing aids, wear your hearing aids, because even if we can't be sure at the moment that wearing hearing aids will stop you ever getting dementia, we can't say that. We do know that it's going to mean that a lot of that stress will be relieved in the brain, and the brain can get on with trying to cope and manage as best it can, and may delay the appearance of dementia for longer. So we absolutely endorse the message that you should get your hearing checked, look after your hearing, and wear hearing aids if you need to wear hearing aids.
Fab. And does this just relate to age-related hearing impairment, or how does it relate to other conditions? So let's say somebody might lose their hearing earlier in life, or they might have something like tinnitus. Like, do we know, or is it what's happening there?
So when you go along at the moment and have what we currently regard as a standard hearing test, what the audiologist will typically do is get you to detect very, very faint sounds in silence under sort of ideal listening conditions, to see just how sensitive the ears are picking up those sounds. And that's a very good index of the kind of the receiver, which is out in the cochlea in the ears. But it tells us very little about what your brain can actually do with sound when it, for example, is listening to a webinar or trying to understand a conversation in a noisy pub. It doesn't relate to that very well at all. And so we really need much better tests of what we would sort of think about as brain hearing, to really be able to understand fully whether someone has a particular type of hearing loss or significant hearing loss or not. The age-related hearing loss that we normally think about, and that this can start really from midlife, we're normally talking about damage to the receiver, to the cochlea, and that kind of change in the functioning of that system. And then that can potentially have these knock-on effects that we were talking about before. But what we don't measure very well at the moment, but we're really very keen to try and get into much wider NHS practice, are tests of brain hearing, so that we can measure hearing that's much more sort of realistic for everyday life, and also potentially could be this early warning system for dementia screening that we've been talking about. So it is a factor, though, that starts to become relevant from sort of middle life, but it may not, and probably isn't, the same type of hearing loss that we're thinking about throughout a person's lifetime.
Thank you very much. I think thank you for kind of sharing some more insight into that. I was going to come to you, Fiona, now with a bit more of a diet-related question, and we've got lots of these, so it's really hard to just pick kind of a particular tack to go down. But we've had some about the gut microbiome, and I don't know if this is something that you feel able to speak about, but I know that it's increasingly of interest for many different health conditions, not just dementia. And yeah, I wondered if you could just share a little bit about what do we know about the gut microbiome and how that might affect dementia risk.
Absolutely. So this is not an area that I've researched myself. I actually did my PhD up in Aberdeen at a nutrition institute, which is part of the university. It's called the Rowett. And there was loads of gut microbiome research going on there for a whole host of things. And that was the first time I actually became aware that it was something that was really important. So what we do know is that your gut microbiome can be massively influenced by what you eat. So again, it's another good reason to why you want to keep things healthy, to feed the good bacteria in your gut rather than letting the bad bacteria to have a chance to take over. It's interesting, we were talking earlier about the brain barrier and how it can become leaky. We actually know that this can happen in the gut as well. So if you have an unhappy gut and lots of bad bacteria that take over and live there rather than the good bacteria, you can actually end up with a leaky gut. And a leaky anything is not good. You don't want things getting out into your bloodstream that usually aren't allowed there. So that's what we know about gut. So again, it's about thinking about those foods that can be good for your gut. Lots of whole grains, things like low fat, low sugar yogurts, things that are going to really feed the good bacteria in your gut and hopefully keep everything happy.
Thank you. Coming back to a bit more of like a general question, I guess, on this. So we've been talking about factors that have been shown at population level to reduce the risk of developing dementia. But do some of these things, do they also apply to once you have dementia? Is there any evidence that doing them has any benefits? Is it not too late at that point? But yeah, are the messages the same? And I wonder, Jason, given your clinical work, if you wanted to speak about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important, and this gets back to the theme, which I think we should all be starting to think about, that dementia isn't one size fits all. And it's first of all, it's people with dementia. And we say, you know, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. So it's very important to sort of think about personalized medicine, which is the current buzzword, but I think this is very important for a complicated disease like, say, Alzheimer's. But you know, and so you do have to see what's happening in an individual person's life. But I think in general, the advice is that, you know, many of the kind of general strategies that we might use in someone in sort of late middle life who's worried about early older life, who's worried about their risk of dementia, you know, many of the things we'd advise them to do would also be things that we'd have someone doing, certainly in the earlier stages where they're developing Alzheimer's. We should still be getting them to look after their blood vessel health. I mean, we send them to GPs. We don't stop looking after their general health at all. That's definitely the wrong way to think about this. Somehow everything stops because you have a diagnosis of dementia. That's just wrong. And the hearing is the same because, you know, in a way, if you think about it, it's just going to be even worse, even harder, and make even more of an impact if someone has early Alzheimer's disease and hearing loss. So it's even more important to treat the parts of that we can treat. So if they have receiver-based problems, age-related hearing loss, treat that. So I'd say overall, the general takeaway message is many of these factors remain relevant.
Fab. And kind of on a similar kind of theme with this is when we're talking about these factors, I think it's really important, as we've said already, that doing these things isn't a surefire way to mean you do all these lifestyle behaviors and you definitely won't develop dementia. And I think it's really important that when we are talking about them, we're balanced and we try to avoid there being any perception of blame around people developing a diagnosis. So I just wondered if either of you wanted to comment on kind of best practice or ways in which that we can try and make sure that it's not kind of seen as just a personal responsibility, reducing the risk of dementia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely no blame. At the end of the day, as we said, you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, and we can't track all the decisions that someone's made throughout their life, and you can't pinpoint it down to a few things. But what we can do in this case is just give some advice and make sure people have access to knowledge that can let them make good decisions for themselves, that give them the best chance of having healthy brains for as long as possible. And I think it's important to note with the risk factors, if you are lowering your risk for dementia, you're also lowering your risk for other illnesses as well, such as cancer and heart disease too. So it's actually a really positive thing to think, well, I'm really concerned about my brain health, so I'm going to make a few changes. But actually, those changes can have a wider impact than just your brain and just your dementia as well. I'll let Jason comment.
I'd just like to underline, I think victim blaming is a very, very real and pernicious danger here, and I think it interacts in ways that are often unhelpful with political messaging, and we've got to guard against it actively. It's actually interesting. Dementia in some ways is in the same situation cancer was in, going back a few decades, and Susan Sontag, who wrote eloquently about many things, wrote about victim blaming in cancer, and I'd recommend anybody looks at that essay that she wrote. It's very telling, and I'd say some of the same points apply. You don't know what an individual's life trajectory, the things that have gone into their makeup have been. And there's no sense in which somehow they've fallen short. And I think the other theme that interacts with that is this whole really big problem for dementia research, for dementia care, of really striking lack of diversity, which is largely invisible in many of the current sort of policy making decisions, but absolutely needs to be made visible. Because if you look at a worldwide perspective, I mean, a global perspective across the human race, the vast majority, the burden of dementia is carried by non-English speaking, non-Western cultures, people living in lower middle income countries. And if you take a very diverse population like the UK's aging population, that's also underlined for that population. And the people that are most vulnerable are also the people that find it hardest to access care, hardest to get into trials. They're often excluded. They're the hardest hit at all levels. And we're not very good at assessing them as a general rule, or engaging with them. And we don't even understand often what the barriers are. And so it's very, very easy to kind of tailor messages for the easier, if you like, segments of the kind of the lower hanging fruit, but really ignore where the kind of the major challenges actually are. And so I'd really like, and I know our UK also thinks about this a lot, to encourage, funders, policymakers to start trying to engage with the whole spectrum of people. And there are lots of inequities and inequalities that aren't suspected, even if you start looking at demographics. For example, a lot of people with dementia are under the age of 65. Those people often have particular problems, lead in with problems that have nothing to do with memory, and they're completely excluded by a lot of the frameworks, and even the frameworks that are now being proposed for the new disease-modifying treatments. If we're not very careful, will exclude people living with these less common, less standard forms of dementia. And so I think it's a vitally important problem. So I'll get down off my soapbox now.
No, thank you. And I guess that you mentioned kind of political action. I think that's really important to mention in that, yes, there are things in our personal control that we could do in our kind of local environments that we can change, but there's certain things we can't change. So things like pollution, which Fiona mentioned earlier, that needs wide societal action, that needs change from, and it's driven by governments and by society. So
Education too, Kate.
yeah. So in this country, we are provided with an education up to a particular age, but across the world, that is not the case. And that could be one of the things that could really shift the dial on the rates of people developing dementia across the world. So yeah, there's wider actions to take as well. And I know that our policy department is hot on the case with lots of this. We're rapidly running out of time, so I've got one final. I want to give Jason and Fiona each a moment to give like one takeaway message. So, from either your own areas of research or just generally on the topic of dementia risk, if you could tell people one thing that they could do to look after their brain health based on what we know about dementia risk, what would you say? I'm putting you on the spot there.
Fiona, you go first.
One thing. Well, for me, it would be about just looking after your whole body. We, I think, have been very poor in dementia research for a number of years on focusing almost too much on the brain. And what we need to remember is that your brain's not isolated. It sits in your whole body. It sends out signals to your whole body and it receives signals from your whole body. So what I would say to people is just think about things that are good for your whole body. Go outside, stay active, do exercise if you can. But staying active doesn't it doesn't mean running a marathon. It means just going for that walk around the block or going with your neighbor to walk their dog. Staying social is really important. And another good reason to get your hearing checked is so that you can stay social and have those conversations with your friends and your family and just do good things. But what I would say is don't punish yourself when it comes to your diet. Don't not go out for that birthday meal. Go do those things because that's what makes life a nice life to live. But just think, rather than focus on one day where you maybe had a bit of cake and maybe a nice steak dinner, look at maybe the whole week at what you're eating in a whole week and just check that you're eating good things in there as well. Your whole grains, you're not eating too much sugar, maybe one biscuit, not two. And also something else which I'm a big fan of is eating lots of fish and omega-3 rich foods. That's something that we haven't really had a chance to talk about, but those are great things for your body. They are fats, but that's what I was saying before about not demonizing fats and sugars. But yeah, lots of omega-3 fatty acids is great for your brain as well. And just, look after yourself and look after your friends and family.
Wonderful. Jason, any more to add?
I'm going to try for one word, and the one word I'd want people to keep in mind is communicate. So that means obviously make sure you can communicate and look after your hearing, but also don't accept barriers and make sure you tell people. And if you share concerns, and that would initially might be with your GP, but also it's very important to give perspectives about what it's been like for you, and we need to gather those from as many different people as we can, and keep the communication going also with the higher powers that make policies. I think it's a very, very important theme in dementia research, not just these, but also everything that follows from it.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, those great takeaway points from you there. So I'd just like to say thank you to both Jason and Fiona for coming along today. We'll say goodbye to them in a moment, but if everybody on the call could just hold on just a little bit longer because we've got some final bits of information to give you. But yeah, thank you so much, Jason and Fiona, for coming on. So before you go today, we just got a few bits of information, as I said. So firstly, we'd like to do a quick poll just to find out how you found today's event. And I know that we had so many questions that we didn't come to, and we're going to kind of signpost you onto other places that we hopefully can get those answered in a moment. But yes, if you could just give us some insight into the content of today. Were we too technical? Were we about right? Would you recommend these to your friends and family to find out more about dementia research? And do you think you've learned something new today? So I'll just pause and let people complete that right now. It's always a very nervous moment for me as the team who delivers these. We always want to kind of hope that we're getting them about right. And it looks like from the votes that we're getting so far that yes, we are getting it about right. So the content most people have said was about right. People agree that they would recommend these and that they have learned something. So that's really, really wonderful. And we'll be sending out a more detailed feedback survey later today. Please do share any comments with you as they help us understand what is working well and where we can make improvements. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we have this free will writing offer at the moment with the experts at FairWill. And so there's some information on the screen now and some links to follow. And Gifts and Wills is such an important thing for us here at Alzheimer Research UK. And we know that Gifts and Wills funds around 1 in 3 of our research projects and can be seen as the ultimate gift for the future, ensuring that scientists can continue their vital research. And as I said, you can write your will for free with the experts at FairWill, starting with a straightforward questionnaire, and then they write the will that you then take away and sign within, and they send it within 5 working days. So you can follow the link or scan the QR code, and just remember there's no obligation to Alzheimer Research UK if you use this offer. And as I said, we had so many questions come through today, and I know there may be some that we weren't able to answer or where you might need some more personalised information or signposting. So our Dementia Research Infoline is here to help. The team can answer questions and signpost on to other organisations who can offer support. I should also mention at this point our Think Brain Health information, which provides some more kind of practical information about looking after your own brain health. And you may also be interested in finding out more about Join Dementia Research, a service that can match you to research studies. And all that we talked about today is only possible because of people taking part in research. And anyone can sign up to Join Dementia Research as long as they're over the age of 18. You don't need to have a dementia diagnosis to take part. And you can find out more on their website or by calling our Dementia Research info line. And details will be pasted in the chat and also in our follow-up emails. We are in the process right now of finalising the details for our next and final event of the year, our In Conversation at Christmas event, which we are planning for December. We're assembling a great lineup, and together we will look back on the big dementia research news of 2024 and explore what is on the horizon for next year. And we'll have more information to share on this very soon. So that all it leaves now is to say thank you for coming along today and taking the time to find out more about dementia research. You've heard the evidence behind the advice we often hear and how research is revealing vital information that can also fuel other areas of research. And thank you for all your support that has got us to this point. And if you're interested in other ways to support the work of Alzheimer Research UK, do check out our website as there's lots of ways to get involved. Thank you again for joining us today. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that you can join us in December for our final event of the year. Thank you and goodbye.